There is something happening inside millions of American homes right now. Not in the streets, not in the headlines, inside, behind closed doors. In the quiet moments after everyone else has gone to sleep. A person picks up their phone, opens an app, and spends money they do not have. Not because they are careless, not because they are stupid, but because something inside them, something deep and invisible and incredibly powerful, is pulling them toward that purchase like gravity. They will feel better for a few minutes, maybe a few hours, and then the feeling will be gone and the debt will still be there. And tomorrow night they will do it again. This is not a budgeting problem. This is not a discipline problem, this is an addiction. And it is one of the most widespread, most damaging, and least talked about addictions in modern America. Today we are going to talk about it honestly. We are going to go into the neuroscience, the psychology, the childhood wounds, and the social systems that are specifically designed to keep you spending. And we are going to talk about what it actually takes to break free. Not with willpower, not with a spreadsheet, but with understanding. Because you cannot fight an enemy you cannot see, and right now most people cannot see this one at all. Stay with me, because what you're about to learn might be the most financially important thing you have heard in years. Let me start with your brain, specifically with a chemical called dopamine. Most people think dopamine is the pleasure chemical. That is not quite accurate. Dopamine is the anticipation chemical. It is released not when you get something, but when you expect to get something. When you are about to get something, when the possibility of reward is in front of you. This is a critical distinction, because it means that the most powerful dopamine hit does not come from the purchase itself. It comes from browsing, it comes from adding items to the cart. It comes from the moment right before you click buy. Neuroscientist Kent Berridge at the University of Michigan spent decades studying this distinction. He called it the difference between wanting and liking. Dopamine drives wanting. Wanting is electric, urgent, consuming. Liking, the actual experience of pleasure, is quieter. Shorter, far less powerful than the wanting that preceded it. This is why you can spend 2 hours browsing online stores, feeling alive, focused, almost euphoric, and then make a purchase and feel almost nothing. Or worse, feel a hollow emptiness that makes you want to start browsing again immediately. The purchase was never the point, the wanting was the point. And your brain, your ancient, survival-oriented, reward-seeking brain, will keep generating wanting as long as you keep feeding it the stimulus. This is the neurological engine of compulsive spending. And here is what makes it so dangerous right now. Every major retail platform in existence has been specifically engineered to exploit this mechanism. The infinite scroll, the one-click purchase, the limited time offer. The you might also like algorithm, the free returns policy that removes friction from impulse buying. The buy now, pay later option that separates the emotional pleasure of acquisition from the financial pain of payment. These are not accidents. These are the results of billions of dollars of research into human psychology, deployed specifically to keep your dopamine system activated, specifically to keep you in a state of wanting, specifically to keep you spending. You are not weak for falling into these traps, you are human. And you are up against systems designed by some of the most sophisticated behavioral scientists in the world. But understanding what you are up against is the first step to having power over it. Now let me tell you about the emotional layer, because compulsive spending is not just neurological. It is emotional. Think about the last time you made an impulsive purchase. What were you feeling right before it? Stressed, bored, lonely, anxious, sad? Or maybe you were celebrating, trying to capture a feeling of joy that you were afraid would slip away. Research by clinical psychologist April Lane Benson, one of the leading experts on compulsive buying, consistently shows that impulsive spending is almost always preceded by a negative emotional state. The purchase is not really about the item. The purchase is an attempt to regulate an emotion, to soothe anxiety, to escape boredom, to fill a feeling of emptiness, to reward yourself after a painful experience, to feel in control when everything else feels chaotic. This is what psychologists call emotional spending, and it is extraordinarily common. A 2022 survey found that the average American makes 3 impulse purchases per week, spending an average of $314 per month on unplanned purchases. That is nearly $4,000 per year, not on necessities, not on investments. On emotional regulation, on temporary relief from feelings that come back stronger once the dopamine fades. This is one of the most expensive emotional coping mechanisms in modern life. And most people who do it have no idea that is what they are doing. They think they just like shopping, they think they deserve nice things. They think they will be more careful next month, but next month arrives. And the emotions arrive with it, and the cycle continues. Let me tell you about a woman named Sarah. Sarah is 34 years old. She has a good job, she earns $60,000 a year. She has almost nothing in savings. Every month she pays the minimum on 4 credit cards. Every month she tells herself this is the month she gets it together. And every month something happens, a hard week at work. A difficult conversation with her mother. A Friday night alone when everyone else seems to be living their best life on Instagram. And Sarah opens her phone and she spends, not a lot at once, never a lot at once. $23 here, $67 there. $112 on something she convinced herself she needed. By the end of the month, she has spent $400 she did not plan to spend. And she feels ashamed, and the shame is itself an uncomfortable emotion. And uncomfortable emotions for Sarah have one well-worn solution: you see the loop. Sarah is not irresponsible, Sarah is in pain. And she has learned somewhere along the way that spending is the fastest available relief from that pain. The question is where she learned it. Because compulsive spending, like almost every self-destructive pattern, has roots. It rarely begins in adulthood, it begins in the emotional environment of childhood. Research by Dr. Galen Buckwalter, a psychologist who has studied financial behavior extensively, found a strong correlation between childhood emotional neglect and adult compulsive spending. When children grow up in environments where their emotional needs are consistently unmet, where love is conditional, where comfort is unavailable, where the home is a source of stress rather than safety, they develop what psychologists call emotional dysregulation. They never learn healthy ways to manage difficult feelings, because no one modeled those ways for them. And so they reach adulthood with an emotional gap, a chronic deficit of comfort and soothing, and they search for ways to fill it. For some people, that gap gets filled with food, for some with alcohol, for some with work, for many with spending, because spending is socially acceptable. Because spending is immediately available, because spending for a few minutes actually works. It actually produces a neurochemical response that feels like relief. Until it does not anymore, and more is needed to produce the same effect. This is the escalation pattern of every addiction. And compulsive spending follows it precisely. What begins as an occasional treat becomes a weekly habit. What begins as a weekly habit becomes a daily ritual. What begins as small purchases becomes larger ones, because the nervous system has adapted, because $20 no longer produces the same response it once did, because the brain, in its relentless pursuit of homeostasis, has raised the threshold. And the debt grows, and the shame grows, and the emotional pain that started the cycle grows too. Because now there is the original pain, plus the financial stress, plus the shame of the financial stress, plus the helplessness of watching yourself repeat a pattern you hate. This is how people end up tens of thousands of dollars in debt, not through a few dramatic financial mistakes, but through years of small, emotionally driven purchases, each one a few dollars, each one a few minutes of relief adding up, over time to a financial hole that feels impossible to climb out of. And here is the part that almost nobody talks about: the system is not neutral. The financial system in America is not a passive landscape in which people make free choices. It is an actively engineered environment designed to maximize spending and minimize the psychological friction of debt. Consider credit cards. The average American carries a credit card balance of over $6,000. Credit card companies earn the majority of their revenue from interest paid by people who carry balances, which means their business model depends on people spending more than they can immediately repay. They have spent decades lobbying against regulations that would limit interest rates. They have spent decades designing reward programs that make spending feel like earning. They have spent decades making credit feel like freedom, when for millions of people it functions as a cage. Buy now, pay later services have taken this further. By allowing people to acquire items immediately while deferring payment, and by doing so with minimal friction, minimal credit checks, and maximum psychological ease, these services have made it easier than ever to spend money that does not yet exist. A 2023 report from the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau found that buy now, pay later users were significantly more likely to carry high levels of overall debt and significantly more likely to be financially distressed than non-users. These are not coincidences. These are the predictable outcomes of systems designed to profit from spending, not from financial well-being. Understanding this does not remove personal responsibility, but it provides essential context. Because when you are fighting compulsive spending, you are not just fighting your own psychology. You are fighting the psychology plus the most sophisticated commercial manipulation infrastructure in human history. And you deserve to know that, so what does breaking free actually look like? I want to be honest with you here, because most of what you will find online about stopping compulsive spending is surface level. Delete the shopping apps, unsubscribe from retail emails. Put your credit cards in a drawer. These things can help at the margins. But they do not address the root. They are the equivalent of putting a bandage on a wound that needs surgery. If the spending is emotional, if it is driven by the need to regulate feelings that feel otherwise unmanageable, then removing the behavior without addressing the underlying emotional need will simply cause the need to find another outlet. Another behavior, another way of running from the same pain. Real change requires going to the root, and the root is emotional. The first thing that has to happen is awareness, not the surface-level awareness of I spend too much. Everyone with a spending problem knows they spend too much, the deeper awareness. What am I feeling in the moments before I spend? This is harder than it sounds. Because compulsive spending often happens in a kind of dissociative state. A semi-conscious autopilot in which the hand reaches for the phone before the mind has registered what is happening. Building awareness requires slowing the moment down. It requires developing the capacity to notice the emotional state before the behavior begins. This is a skill, it has to be practiced. One practical approach is what therapists call urge surfing. When you feel the urge to spend, instead of immediately acting on it or immediately suppressing it, you pause. You observe it, you describe it to yourself. Where do you feel it in your body? What emotion is underneath it? What happened in the last few hours that might have triggered it? You do not judge the urge, you do not fight it, you simply observe it like a wave. And what research consistently shows is that when you observe an urge without feeding it, it peaks. And then it passes, usually within 15 to 20 minutes. The urge is not permanent. It only feels permanent because you have always responded to it before it had a chance to pass. The second thing that has to happen is substitution, not suppression, substitution. The emotional need that spending is meeting is real. The need for soothing, for stimulation, for relief, for connection, these are legitimate human needs. They do not disappear because you stop spending. They need to be met in other ways. This is deeply personal. For some people, physical movement is the most effective substitute. A walk, a workout, anything that changes the physiological state and provides a natural dopamine response. For some people, connection is the answer. The loneliness or disconnection that triggers spending is best addressed directly with actual human contact, even if that feels harder in the moment. For some people, creative engagement works, cooking, writing, music. Anything that activates the reward system through making rather than acquiring. The substitution has to be real. It has to actually address the emotional need. Not just distract from it temporarily, because distraction without substitution leads back to the same place. The third thing, and this is the one most people resist, is professional support. Compulsive spending, when it is deeply rooted in emotional dysregulation or unresolved trauma, is not a problem that awareness and substitution alone can fully address. Just as you would not attempt to treat a serious physical illness with willpower and lifestyle changes alone, a deeply ingrained behavioral pattern that is rooted in emotional wounds deserves professional attention. Cognitive behavioral therapy has the strongest evidence base for treating compulsive spending. It works by identifying and restructuring the thought patterns that drive the behavior, and by building the emotional regulation skills that make the behavior unnecessary. There is no shame in seeking this kind of help. There is only the choice between continuing to suffer alone and taking the step that actually moves the needle. Now I want to talk about something that goes beyond the individual. Because while personal psychology is central to this conversation, financial struggle in America today is also a structural issue. The median American household income, adjusted for inflation, has not grown meaningfully in decades. The cost of housing, healthcare, and education have all dramatically outpaced wage growth. Millions of Americans are spending compulsively not just because of psychological wounds, but because the gap between what they earn and what it costs to live a stable life has never been wider. When economic anxiety is constant and legitimate, when the math of your life simply does not add up no matter how carefully you try, the emotional regulation that spending provides is not a character flaw. It is a reasonable response to an unreasonable situation. This context matters, because too much of the conversation around financial behavior places all of the responsibility on the individual, and none of it on the systems that created the conditions for that behavior. Healing your relationship with money requires both. It requires the internal work, the emotional awareness, the identity shift, the new patterns. And it requires an honest, clear-eyed recognition that the external environment is genuinely difficult and that the difficulty is not your fault. Both things are true simultaneously. You are responsible for your response to your circumstances, and your circumstances are genuinely hard. Holding both of those truths at once, without collapsing into either victimhood or toxic self-blame, is one of the most sophisticated psychological acts a person can perform. And it is the foundation of real, lasting financial change. Let me bring this back to something personal. Think about the version of you that spends compulsively. Not with judgment, with curiosity. What is that version of you trying to do? What need is it trying to meet? What pain is it trying to escape? Because underneath every compulsive behavior, underneath every pattern that looks from the outside like self-destruction, there is a part of a person that is trying, in the only way it knows how, to survive. To feel okay, to get through the day. That part of you is not your enemy. That part of you is the part that has been carrying the most pain. And it deserves compassion, not contempt. The goal is not to destroy that part. The goal is to find it better tools, to give it healthier ways to meet the needs it has been meeting through spending. To offer it the understanding it may never have received from anyone else. This is what the deepest financial healing looks like, not a budget, not a savings plan. A relationship with yourself that is honest enough to see the pain and compassionate enough to address it directly. I want to leave you with 3 practices you can begin today. The first is the pause practice. For the next 30 days, institute a 24-hour rule on every non-essential purchase. When you feel the urge to buy something that is not food, medicine, or a genuine necessity, wait 24 hours. Do not suppress the urge, do not judge yourself for having it, simply wait. And in that waiting, ask yourself honestly, what am I feeling right now? What do I actually need? Is this purchase going to address that need or just temporarily mask it? The second practice is the emotional spending journal. For 30 days, every time you make an unplanned purchase, write down 3 things. What you bought, what you were feeling in the hour before you bought it, how you felt 2 hours after the purchase. Do this without judgment, just observation. Within a month, you will have a clear map of your emotional spending patterns. You will see which emotions trigger spending for you. You will see how long the relief lasts. You will see what it costs you financially and emotionally. That map is more valuable than any budgeting app because it shows you the real architecture of your spending behavior. The third practice is the need audit. Once a week, ask yourself honestly, what do I actually need right now? Not what do I want to buy, what do I actually need? Rest, connection, acknowledgement, stimulation, safety, then find one way to meet that need that does not cost money. Not because money is evil, but because you deserve to have your real needs met, not just temporarily masked. Every time you meet a real need directly, you are weakening the emotional trigger that led to spending. Every time, here is what I want you to carry with you after this video. You are not broken, you are not weak, you are not bad with money. You are a person who developed a coping mechanism in response to real pain. A coping mechanism that worked well enough to survive, but that is now costing you more than it is giving you. And the fact that you are here, the fact that you watched this far, tells me that some part of you already knows that. Some part of you is ready to stop managing the symptom and start addressing the wound. Ready to build a relationship with money that is based on clarity and values, rather than pain and relief. Ready to stop spending your future to escape your present. That readiness is the beginning of everything. You do not need to have it all figured out. You do not need to be perfect. You just need to take the next honest step. And then the one after that, that is how this changes, one honest step at a time. If this video reached something real in you, if you recognized yourself somewhere in what we talked about today, I want you to do 3 things right now. First, drop the word aware in the comments, not because it is a trend, but because naming what you now see makes it real. It turns awareness into intention. And intention is where change begins. Second, hit the like button. Not for the algorithm, but as a personal commitment to yourself. An acknowledgement that you are done pretending this is not affecting your life. Third, subscribe, because this channel exists for one reason: to go deeper than the surface. To talk about money, psychology, and human behavior with the honesty and the respect you deserve. And we are just getting started. The next chapter of your financial life does not begin when you earn more. It begins right now in the decision to see clearly, to feel honestly, and to choose differently. That chapter is yours, claim it.